There are places in America where the pipes don't run clean water, where children grow up breathing air the EPA has flagged as dangerous, where the nearest hospital is an hour away on a road that floods every other spring, where the unemployment rate hasn't dipped below 30% in 2 decades, not because of a recession, but because the thing that made the town possible just stopped one day, packed up, and drove away. We're not talking about natural disasters. We're not talking about war zones. We're talking about zip codes inside the United States of America, most of them within 2 hours of a city you've driven through, with well-lit interstates and chain restaurants, and the illusion that prosperity is everywhere. It isn't. Behind that illusion is a second map, one the Tourism Bureau never prints. It runs through river deltas and coal hollows and desert crossroads and former industrial waterfronts, through towns that once held 10,000 people and now hold 400, through places where the government came in, extracted everything useful, and left behind the cost. Third world conditions aren't always about geography. Sometimes they're about what happens when a country decides certain people and certain places simply aren't worth fixing. These are 15 of those places, real towns, real residents, real numbers that don't match the country they're supposed to be part of. Some of them you'll recognize, most of them you won't. All of them are closer to you than you think. Here are 15 forgotten American towns with third world living conditions. East St. Louis, Illinois. From the top of the Gateway Arch on the Missouri side of the river, you can see the American dream. A gleaming skyline, a renovated waterfront, billions in development. Turn around and look east across the Mississippi. That's where it ends. East St. Louis experienced one of the most complete urban collapses in American history. In the early 1900s, it was a thriving industrial port. Over 82,000 people, factories running around the clock, a genuine city. Then deindustrialization hit, then white flight, then political corruption so deep and so sustained that the city couldn't fund basic services. Police, sanitation, street lighting. The tax base evaporated. By 2020, the population had dropped 78%. What's left is a city where entire blocks have returned to prairie. Where the violent crime rate rivals active conflict zones. Where infrastructure decay is so advanced that residents have reported raw sewage in streets during heavy rain. Where per capita income sits at levels that, measured globally, place this American city alongside nations classified as developing. This isn't one bad decade. This is institutional failure compounding across generations. A living answer to the question nobody wants to ask. What happens when everyone with the power to help simply decides to leave? The river keeps moving. East St. Louis stays still, and the gap between the two banks keeps growing. Lynch, Kentucky. Lynch was built to be the largest coal camp in the world. For a time, it was. U.S. Steel broke ground in 1917 and built a city, 12,000 people at peak, with a hospital, hotel, YMCA, churches for every denomination the workforce represented. The company owned the streets, the houses, the store, the water. It owned the logic of daily life. And for decades, that logic worked because the coal was real and the wages were steady, and Lynch had everything you needed as long as you didn't look too hard at what you were breathing underground. Then Big Steel consolidated, automated, and withdrew. The population collapsed from 12,000 to under 700. What remains is disorienting in its scale. The brick bathhouse still stands, the company hotel, the stone hospital. Yes, your infrastructure engineered for 12,000 lives now serves a fraction of that. A community where poverty rates exceed 40%, where young people leave as fast as they can, where the buildings the company built to last are outlasting any reason to be there. The architecture was designed to outlast everyone who used it. It did. Pahokee, Florida. Muck City sits on soil so rich it grows a third of America's sugar. The land around Lake Okeechobee is an agricultural gold mine worth billions. None of that money stays in Pahokee. The town exists to serve Big Sugar, providing labor that cuts cane in 100-degree heat for wages that haven't meaningfully changed in decades. The wealth flows through and vanishes upward, leaving behind concentrated poverty that places Pahokee among the lowest income communities in Florida. During harvest season, the air fills with what locals call black snow, ash and smoke from burning cane fields, coating cars and coating lungs with the residue of an industry that takes everything and gives back as little as legally required. Then there's the dike. The Herbert Hoover Dike was built after the 1928 hurricane that killed thousands, mostly poor black migrant workers whose deaths were never accurately counted. The concrete wall now cuts Pahokee off from the lake that once defined it, a physical barrier between the town and the water it can no longer access. Endless green fields of valuable crops, shuttered homes and empty storefronts, an economy built entirely on agricultural wealth that produces grinding, generational poverty. The contradiction doesn't resolve because it was never meant to. Pahokee exists to extract labor the way the fields extract sugar, efficiently, completely, without giving anything permanent back. Helena-West, Helena, Arkansas. This is where you come if you want to understand what generational poverty actually looks like in the body of a place. Helena was once a thriving Mississippi River port, a blues music hub where legends were born from hardship. West Helena grew up alongside it. In 2006, the two cities merged out of pure economic desperation, hoping that combining what little remained might stop the bleeding. It didn't. The mechanization of agriculture killed the farm jobs that had replaced river commerce. Median household income hovers around $25,000. Poverty rates consistently exceed 40%. The violent crime rate places this merged city among the most dangerous small communities in America, not because violence is the story, but because it's the symptom of a cycle running so long and so deep that people have stopped believing it can be broken. The blues were born from hardship here, from people turning pain into something transcendent. Helena-West. Helena kept the hardship. The transcendence, like the music, like the young people, moved away. Anniston, Alabama. Anniston didn't just lose its economy, it lost its ground. For decades, a Monsanto plant contaminated the area with PCBs, polychlorinated biphenyls, toxic compounds that seeped into soil, water, and air at concentrations that would define the town's future. The EPA designated large portions of Anniston as Superfund sites. The contamination was known internally and concealed for years before it reached the public. When Fort McClellan closed in 1999, the town lost its second-largest employer in the same generation it lost trust in its own earth. What followed was the psychological toll that no economic study adequately captures. The specific weight of living in a place that is literally poisoned, where your hometown is a public health crisis, where children playing in the dirt aren't just playing in dirt, where the phrase safe drinking water carries a history no press release can erase. Poverty rates here consistently exceed 30%. Property values in the most contaminated zones collapsed and never recovered. The people who stayed didn't stay because conditions improved. They stayed because leaving cost money they don't have. This is physical betrayal turned into economic condition, a community shaped as much by what was done to it as by what was taken from it. McKeesport, Pennsylvania. They called the Mon Valley the workshop of the world when the National Tube Works ran 24 hours a day, when steel built futures and the mills employed entire families across generations. The mills closed in the 1980s. The population collapsed by over 60%, and the vacuum didn't stay empty. The opioid crisis rolled into McKeesport like a second industry, filling every gap that steel left behind, providing the kind of predictable community structure that devastation creates when nothing legitimate replaces what was lost. Drug trafficking became the most stable economy in some neighborhoods. Overdose rates climbed. The violent crime rate exceeded the state average by a distance that statistics alone can't convey. Grandparents here remember the boom. Parents remember the collapse. Children are growing up in the shadow of silent mills, structures still standing like gravestones for what this place was once capable of being, with no living memory of what employment security felt like. McKeesport helped build the cars that put America on the road. Then one day the jobs drove away, and what came in behind them was a crisis that's now multi-generational, written into the community's biology as much as its economy. Lumberton, North Carolina. Lumberton sits precisely on Interstate 95, the main artery of the East Coast. Every day, hundreds of thousands of people pass through on their way somewhere else, and the dangers that arrive on the highway often decide to stay. I-95 isn't just a road through Lumberton, it's a crime corridor. Drug trafficking, human trafficking. The motels and truck stops that line the exits are documented transit points for illicit activity flowing north and south like a current through the community's bloodstream. But Lumberton isn't just fighting the highway, it's drowning. Hurricane Matthew flooded it in 2016. Hurricane Florence flooded it again in 2018. Catastrophic back-to-back disasters that destroyed homes primarily in the poorest neighborhoods, where residents had no savings buffer, no adequate insurance, and no political leverage to accelerate recovery. Years later, gutted houses still stand on affected blocks. Water lines are still visible on structures that haven't been touched since the water receded. Poverty here exceeds 30%. The town is caught between the constant inflow of transient crime from above and rising water from below. And in between, people are trying to live in a place where recovery has become a permanent state, where every storm is just another setback in a series that never stops. Gallup, New Mexico. Gallup calls itself the gateway to Indian country, a trading hub at the edge of the Navajo Nation. What it doesn't put in the brochure is what that position has meant in practice for generations. Gallup's aggravated assault rate is among the highest in the nation. But the violence here is inseparable from a decades-long alcohol crisis that has consumed entire generations, a crisis rooted in historical dispossession, economic exclusion, and systemic neglect, so sustained it has become the environment itself. Liquor stores line the roads leading out of the Navajo Nation, positioned deliberately at the boundary of a reservation where alcohol was historically prohibited. Homelessness rates are severe. Whilst emergency room utilization for alcohol-related incidents places extraordinary strain on a hospital system serving a largely uninsured population. The mental health infrastructure is inadequate by any national standard. This isn't a mystery that requires investigation. The causes are documented, studied, reported on for decades. What's been absent isn't understanding. It's the political will to treat this community as though it deserves what the rest of America takes for granted: clean water, adequate health care, economic opportunity, and the simple dignity of not being exploited at the edge of a border someone else drew. Bastrop, Louisiana. This was a town built on paper, literally. One employer, one industry, one heartbeat. The paper mill that International Paper eventually shut down, ripping the whole story apart in a single corporate decision. No backup plan, no economic transition strategy. No diversification, just a mill town in the Louisiana Delta after the mill stopped running. What followed was the second highest violent crime rate in a state that already leads the nation in violent crime. Poverty rates exceeding 35%, a downtown commercial core that never recovered. Young people leaving as fast as any available transportation would take them. Single industry dependence is the most dangerous economic model a community can be built on, and Bastrop is its textbook result. The mill was Bastrop's identity. Its closure wasn't just job loss, it was an erasure of purpose. And in the vacuum left behind, generations of Delta poverty that predated the mill reclaimed the ground. The industry had temporarily covered. The machines went silent. The smoke stopped rising. And the town's reason for existing simply ceased to exist. What remained was the people, still there, in a place that no longer had a plan for them. Muskegon Heights, Michigan. Classic Rust Belt arithmetic. Company arrives, company leaves, community absorbs the cost alone. Muskegon Heights was home to major pipe and steel manufacturing that fed the auto industry's appetite. Then the 1980s came. The factories closed. The population collapsed by over 60%. And what filled the vacuum wasn't a recovery plan, it was pills. The opioid crisis hit Muskegon Heights with the specificity of a targeted strike. Communities with high unemployment, low social mobility, and limited mental health infrastructure became ground zero for pharmaceutical companies that understood exactly where their product would take root. Addiction rates climbed. Overdose deaths accumulated. The crimes that follow addiction, desperate person to person, born of need rather than organization, drove the violent crime rate above Detroit's on a per capita basis. The auto industry left this town its pollution, its vacant lots, and its silence. The pharmaceutical industry left its addiction. The federal government left its statistics. The people of Muskegon Heights are still there, building lives inside an economy that has twice been defined by what other entities chose to extract from them. Wheelwright, Kentucky. Island Creek Coal built Wheelwright in 1916, and they built it the way corporations built things when they believed they'd be there forever, completely, deliberately, hierarchically. A planned community from the first survey stake. Company houses arranged by rank in the corporate structure, supervisors near the center, regular miners further out, a physical map of power rendered in wood and stone, a company store so dominant that residents were functionally captive customers. Schools, churches, a movie theater, all provided, all controlled. Then Island Creek began automating, then consolidating, then withdrawing. The population today sits below 300. The company store building still stands on its hillside, massive and concrete, completely out of proportion to everything around it. And it looms over what remains of the town like a monument to the logic that built the place and then abandoned it. The hierarchical street layout is still legible if you know what you're looking at. The plan is still physically present. The population it was designed for is not. Poverty rates in surrounding Floyd County exceed 30%. Broadband access is limited. Healthcare infrastructure is stretched across distances that, in rural Appalachia, translate directly to preventable deaths. The bones of Island Creek's ambition are still here. Island Creek is not. Florida City, Florida. This is the last stop on the mainland before the Florida Keys, the gateway to paradise. For tourists, it's a place you pass through. For the people who live here, it's the end of the line. Geography is destiny, and Florida City's destiny is to be a bottleneck. Tourists passing through to Key West, migrant agricultural workers flowing in and out of homesteads, farms, transient populations moving through on the way to somewhere else. That creates a specific kind of volatility. Low-wage seasonal work, motels functioning as semi-permanent housing, a community defined by what it's adjacent to rather than what it actually is. Then Hurricane Andrew hit in 1992, one of the most destructive storms in American history. Florida City rebuilt the structures, the social and economic fabric never fully recovered. As the storm didn't create the poverty here, but it shattered the stability that had kept the worst of it from surfacing. And what filled the space afterward was the chaotic aftermath of a place that absorbs all of South Florida's hardships without reaping any of its rewards. Violent crime rates here are among Florida's highest for communities this size. Median income lags far behind the state average, and the wealth of the tourist economy flowing 60 miles south doesn't stop here. It just passes through, the way it always has. Danville, Illinois. They used to call the wealthy residents here Vermilion Heirs. When coal ran deep and the GM powertrain plant employed thousands, that nickname meant something. Now the population has been shrinking for 30 years, and what's left behind is the quiet version of collapse, the kind that doesn't make national news because there's no single dramatic event to broadcast. The factories closed gradually, each closure absorbed, survivable alone, catastrophic in accumulation. The younger generations left for opportunities that Danville couldn't provide. What remained was an older population, a shrinking tax base, and a city government trying to fund recovery with resources that evaporate a little more every year. Poverty rates here exceed 25%. Violent crime sits well above national averages for cities its size. Vacant properties have accumulated into a housing blight problem that the city lacks the budget to meaningfully address. Broadband gaps persist. Food access in lower-income neighborhoods is limited to convenience stores and fast food. This is the Midwest town that feels left behind by a country that simply stopped paying attention, not abandoned by catastrophe, but erased by the quiet arithmetic of neglect. One closed factory and one departing family at a time. Neon, Kentucky. Neon was named for the natural gas lights that made it glow when it was founded in the early 20th century. A coal town in Letcher County that had electric infrastructure when most of eastern Kentucky was still without power. The name felt like a promise, bright, modern, connected to the future. At peak, Neon was a genuine commercial hub for the surrounding hollows. Several thousand people. A real main street with a movie theater, hardware stores, and the kind of foot traffic that gives a mountain community a center of gravity. The decline took 50 years. Coal employment dropped in waves. Young people left for Cincinnati, for Lexington, for anywhere with work. The theater closed first, then the stores. Thus, the closures accumulating until what remained were gaps in the fabric large enough to define the town's character more than anything still standing. Today, Neon has under 400 people. The downtown shows the archaeology of its decline in visible layers. Boom-era buildings still standing next to empty lots, next to structures replaced and then abandoned again. A mural project has tried to add color to the main street. The art is real. The prosperity it depicts is not returning. The neon lights are gone. The name floats above a town that spent a century getting darker. Centralia, Pennsylvania. An underground fire has been burning beneath this town since 1962. It will keep burning for at least another 250 years. The spark was mundane, a routine trash burn in a landfill above an abandoned mine pit that May meant to clean up before a holiday. The flame found an exposed seam of anthracite coal and never stopped. Water didn't work. Excavation didn't work. For years, the fire spread through the labyrinth of old mines, invisible and unstoppable, while life continued above it. Then the symptoms started. Headaches, nausea, the metallic taste of carbon monoxide in homes. The ground grew hot to the touch in winter. Steam rose from sidewalk cracks. In 1981, a 12-year-old nearly fell into a sinkhole that opened beneath his feet, releasing superheated gas. And that's when the town understood what was happening. They were being consumed from below, slowly and completely. The federal government funded relocations. Most residents took the buyout. The post office discontinued Centralia's zip code in 2002. Demolition crews leveled nearly every structure. 5 people remain today. Residents who won the legal right to live out their lives above the fire. The streets still exist. Warning signs mark unstable ground. Steam rises from vents in what used to be a neighborhood. The zip code is gone. The fire isn't. Centralia is what happens at the far end of every story on this list. When the extraction doesn't stop, when the cost doesn't get paid, when the bill comes due not as an economic statistic, but as the literal ground giving way beneath your feet, and all burning slow and permanent and completely without mercy. These 15 towns aren't aberrations. They're not outliers on an otherwise clean map. They're the result of repeated predictable decisions. To extract and not restore, to employ and not invest, to build communities on single industries or contaminated land or geographic crossroads that serve others before they serve residents, and then to leave when the extraction was finished without a recovery plan, without accountability, without a forwarding address. What makes each of these places feel like a different country isn't just the poverty rate or the crime statistic or the contaminated water. It's the gap. The distance between what America tells itself it is and what these places actually are. Between the postcard and the zip code. Between the promise and the delivered result. Third world conditions aren't supposed to happen here. That's the story. But the story never accounted for what happens when the factory closes and nothing comes. When the hurricane hits and the aid doesn't reach the neighborhoods that needed it most. When the coal company builds an entire civilization and then decides civilization is no longer profitable. The people in these towns are still there. They didn't leave because leaving costs more than staying. Because roots don't transplant. Because sometimes a place is yours even when it's breaking. And walking away from a broken place feels like giving the thing that broke it exactly what it wanted. These 15 towns are not going away. They're not becoming museums or cautionary tales people drive past on interstates. They're places where people wake up every morning, where children go to school in buildings with aging infrastructure, Where the distance to the nearest hospital measures in human cost. They're part of the hidden map, and that map is larger than most people want to know.